I just have a question because, you and I talk about personal stuff, and some of that stuff's not going to make it out of the podcast because we're not trying to, open our hearts to the world. There still needs to be some mystery about us, I think. But some of the personal issues, do you feel you're getting closer in your writing? Because you've had this breakthrough. You sent me a short story a couple weeks ago, and then, we're going to be talking a little bit about some other work that you've been doing today. But do you feel you're getting closer to exposing a little bit more of you for the writing?
Yeah, I would call it bravery for sure. My entire run up to the last, 4 or 6 months or less has been me convincing myself that it's okay to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to tell real stories. Because every time I look back and say, oh, this one worked, it was something that was informed from my lived experience, and the ones that didn't work were things that I made up whole cloth, where I was really kind of using stereotypes or tropes or just things that were obviously fake, obviously not meaningful. So yeah, I guess the braver I get, the more likely I am to draw on my real experience and try to actually say something relevant. And that's why I've been struggling with relevance, because I think it's still a tug of war inside of me, like, oh, I really want to say this, but will I be judged? Will I be ostracized? Will I be ridiculed? So I'm trying to get over that, and I think I'm getting closer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny sometimes when I feel really stuck on a piece and I kind of take a step back from it and go, what am I feeling right now? Like, what are the things that I'm dealing with right now, like in 2026? Because I think for me, a lot of the stuff that I've had success with has been me kind of taking issues with the past. Let me take this event that I had that happened to me back in, 1992, 99, 2003. And there are still things, because we've talked about it before, I come from a very big place of working out my own shiz through story and using that. But a lot of times I go, oh, wait a minute. Why don't I try writing about what I've got going on right now and see how that helps things? And that's been, it's so weird. It sounds so strange to think of, just to like take your, I generally take my past and not my present. It's still an ongoing therapy session.
No, for real. Dude, my biggest hang up back in the day was I wanted to be the smartest guy in every room, but I didn't want to expose my own personal demons or past or whatever. So I would just try to be clever, and sure, I was smart, but like it was easy to see through, and just not very successful ultimately. The few stories that I got published, because I got published a few, were the ones where I was trying to be really authentic and I didn't care if people like knew where it came from. But even that kind of was veiled in a form, like you remember that story Kite Flying that I published. Yeah, it was written in a style of a screenplay. So, and it was all about an idea, and it was a very short piece. But I was proud of that because I basically drafted and revised it in about a day. I think I tinkered with it the next day, and that was it. It was 2 days, and it was out the door. And that was different back then. It was harder to do, I think, back then. But no, I just now, I guess coming back to it over the course of the podcast has been interesting because I went back to something that was more traditional, more stable, safer. Again, trying to sort of protect myself. And that's when I was sort of shaking my fist at the heavens going, why does my new work technically is better, but is soulless and it's terrible, like not fun to read? Like, why am I writing stuff I don't want to read? I don't know if you remember me complaining about that. And like the answer is because you aren't brave enough yet. Like grow, change, become brave, like just start talking. So in the refills, when I've been doing these kind of look back on my own life, and I wrote that thing about my great great grandmother, and I wrote, I read my mom's eulogy, and all of these are like little attempts to step outside the fortress and just be open and honest and vulnerable. And so far, nobody's ridiculed me. Nobody's, shot me down or whatnot. So every little step into the woods makes the next step easier. So,
yeah. It's something that I kind of came to realize about myself. And here's a lot of I'm just going to lay down in this couch, Art, and you can get your Sigmund Freud glasses on.
Very interesting.
And I think, yes, let me tell you about my mother. Um, a long time ago, when I was a real jerk as far as my relationships were concerned, I think one of the things that was happening was I was portraying myself as someone that was like happy-go-lucky. At least this is what I think. Very funny, very outgoing. And that was an image that I was trying to portray with people. And inside, I was just all kinds of like, insecure, depressed, and all this kind of, usual mixed bag of, of self-imposed drama. And so I think what happened was when I would get further into relationships and the person that I was dating would see me as I really was. And again, I want to make sure, I've dated a lot of smart people. They probably saw this before they started dating me, but at least I think that I was portraying one person. And then when I felt that they saw the real me and that it was kind of ugly, I felt that it was kind of ugly. I would start looking for someone else that I could control the narrative for. You know what I mean? Oh, you know what? Person A that I'm dating sees me as I really am. I just had this mental breakdown. I've been crying about, MCAs dying, and I'm just super depressed. And so I would be like, I need to find someone else that I can be, that I can show the best self of my to, if that makes sense. And so that kind of, I think, translates over into my writing as well, where there was a lot of gimmicks where I would try and be like this, I'm going to be a smart, gimmicky, funny kind of thing, and not really deal with some of that deeper emotional content because I was afraid of exposing myself. And you said it yourself, Art, I think maybe, golly, 3, 4, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10, I don't even remember. It's been so long with you, Art. I tend to, have my stories in the shallow end of the pool, and they don't go into that deep end of emotion. And that's something that I've sort of kind of recently come about with myself. And so I'm trying to face and, to put on the page a little bit more. And I think that sort of ties into what I was saying earlier about being like, I'm just trying to realize, what am I dealing with right now? I can write about this. There might not be, it's always good to have a perspective to make a good story that people want to read. But I am dealing with things right now that I could kind of work on story-wise, that I could draw from my personal life. So yeah, it's about bravery. It's about trying to deal with yourself, and then the real you, which is always the worst person to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I, for the record, I don't think that the way that you described yourself back then, which is accurate, I do not think that continues to this day. And I think the publishing industry is reinforcing, you're giving you lots of positive reinforcement because you're getting published a lot. And it's not because your stuff is, slapstick humor or whatnot. You are starting to dive into the deeper end of the pool. I think you can go further, and I think you know that. But the stuff you're writing is really interesting because you still have that quirky or offbeat sort of entry point. So it's already kind of cool or interesting because of the way you're thinking about it. Like I'm thinking of They Fired Up the Laser. I really love that story. And I think you've read it into the record for folks. So check that out, gang. You can go back and find that in one of our previous episodes. But
the great Dish Soap Quarterly, which I highly recommend folks submit to. Go check it out.
Check it out. Maybe I'll put a link in the show notes. But the story really stuck with me because it felt like you were picking at the edges of, why do we do self-destructive things? Why are we attracted to things that we know could hurt us? Because we do. And it didn't provide a possible solution. It didn't wrap it up in a bow, but it just sort of posited the question in a way that was really compelling and engaging. And I think that's why that thing sticks with me. And so that comes from somewhere. So it's not like you're, vomiting confessions onto the page and it's like reading like a teenage diary or whatnot. No, you're taking this unknowing in your own life and you're processing that through fiction into something that asks the question smartly. And basically you're challenging the reader to ask the question of themselves as well. And I think it's really, really good.
I really appreciate that, but I'm a little bummed because I thought I was writing stories that were like a teenage diary. I'm
Shut
Oh
up.
man, I got to go back. So let's talk about this now. Let's move on here because I want to talk about you're very excited and I want to get to this issue.
Okay.
Um, what I'm interested in is because we've talked about AI so much and that sort of ick factor. When you were told me that you sort of done this treatment, to be honest with you, I was like, a movie treatment, like where did this come from? And it's like very exciting that you seemed so excited about it. So tell me how you used AI without falling into the ick side of the argument.
That's a great question. And this may take a few minutes, so buckle up. But yeah, I feel like this is an ethical use of AI. I am not, feeling like I'm sort of walking on the edge of a precipice that if I lean too far one way, I'm going to fall off a cliff. No, I feel really good about this. And I went back this morning and looked at what I had done just to confirm, like, am I telling myself this because I want it to be true, or is this really the way it worked? And no, it really is. So just to kind of give everybody an update, back in the late 90s, early aughts, I was living in Los Angeles. At that time, I had met an actor who was in a few movies, a very nice man. And he and I became friends. We became drinking buddies, and we used to just, spin CDs and drink and drink. And one of the things we liked to talk about was, wouldn't it be cool if we had an idea for a movie where we could sort of get a quick payout by writing a good treatment and just sort of hand it off? And so it was one of those pipe dreams that you have in Los Angeles at the end of the century, that you could just sort of whip out something good and hand it off and sort of make some money. And so the thing that I posited was the story about a town that I had driven through on my way to move to Los Angeles. It was a town in New Mexico. And when I stopped for gas, it was one of those places, it was named Lordsburg. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to stop in Lordsburg. Like, what the hell is that? I just thought the name of the town was so interesting. And I couldn't quite make it there on the leg that I wanted to. So I ended up stopping for gas in the morning just to kind of get the lay of the land. And when I went there, every person that I encountered in the town was creepy. Like, I didn't understand why the vibe that I felt was so high in get out. Like everything in me was saying, you need to leave this town immediately. Like, you got to go. And so
you mean like in Gretna?
No, great. Well, but no, Lordsburg was freaky. Like, I really was excited to, and look, I was very naive back then. I wanted to have kind of a small town America experience. I would have loved it if I could have rolled into town and seen, characters from the old Andy Griffith show and have that kind of sensibility where everything's just kind of quaint and folksy. So I was hoping for that, but I was also just sort of open to the experience. But dear God, when I went there, people were glowering at me from a distance, like, who are you? You clearly don't belong here. What are you doing here? And so I did not stick around. So anyway, fast forward to me drinking with my friend in Los Angeles, and I'm like, we should do a horror movie based in Lordsburg because that place is freaky. So, no disrespect to the people in Lordsburg. I've actually looked at pictures of it recently on Google Earth, and it's a perfectly fine little town. Like, it's not a problem. But I just remembered that sense of, wow, why did I get so creeped out when I drove through this town? Because the people who looked at me really felt like they didn't want me there. So I had this sort of idea that I was kicking around. I was never able to commit myself to it in a way that I could complete it. And I remember this gentleman would reach out to me from time to time, even after I had moved out to another part of the country. And he would be like, hey, are you going to do that treatment? Like, it was a really good idea. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to work on it soon. Yeah. And I never did. So fast forward to nowish. I've got my Bravery up, and I have been going back and looking at old work. And I'm like, maybe this is a thing. And so as it just so happens, I'm on LinkedIn, just kind of seeing who I can connect with. Cause a lot of people at my current company, I like to connect with those folks and stay current on what they're working on. And I notice that somebody has viewed my profile, and it has the same name as the gentleman that I used to drink with. And I'm like, I wonder if that's him. I'll bet it is, because we had a mutual connection. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And it spurred me on to say, well, shoot, I'm being encouraged at work to use AI. I'm starting to see how it's beneficial as a tool, and I know how to make sure that I'm doing it ethically. Why don't I see what comes out of it? and just see what the treatment would look like. So I went into Claude AI, which is my favorite, and it is the Sonnet 4.5. Is the version of it. And so I typed in probably 100 words or so, just basically describing a high level overview of the treatment. This is the setting. This is what happens. And I told it spit out a 500 word kind of sales pitch treatment. And I was going to send it to him as kind of a joke or just a, hey, I always said I was going to do this, but let the computer do it. Here you go. Nice to see you again. So it spits it out and I start reading it and I'm like, darn, it's actually not terrible. It wasn't right, like at all. The things that were good about it were the things that I told it to put in there. But what I noticed was that as it was populating the template, because it clearly has a template for this type of thing, that it was, I wouldn't say hallucinating, but it was putting in placeholders for the connective tissue that wasn't there. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So it's going to try to complete the assignment even when you don't give it enough information. Huh. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we've been telling people, watch out for that, because if it puts something in there and you like it and you pretend that it's yours, that's cheating in a bad way, right? Because it's not yours. So I said, okay, well, let me tinker with this a little bit. I'm going to replace the things that I didn't add, but clearly, there's a need for connective tissue. Let me just tell it what should go there instead of what's actually there. So I said, no, not this. And like in one part, there was some nonsense about Confederate gold being buried. And I'm like, no, that is not a thing. So we replaced it with other stuff. And I said, spit out a new version, like, keep this, lose this, give me another version. And out came a new version. And what I noticed was each time it did it, it got a little closer to the target. So if you think of it like one of those archery targets and it's a big circle and you have the little bitty bullseye in the middle, each time I did this activity and then gave it more context, more information, told it what to exclude and what to add, it would get to a closer ring on the target. And I felt like this is actually helping me progress this idea in an accelerated format. And I was thrilled because I ended up doing it for about 3 hours or so over the course of a night and then the next morning. And what's neat is you can, it saves the kind of running tally of what you have done. And so this morning, before we started to record, I went back and looked at the transcript of what I told it to put in versus what ended up being the final product, because I wanted to confirm, did I let this thing originate an idea for me? Did I let it steer the ship? And the answer is no. I did. In fact, every prompt that I put in was much longer than the one that preceded it. I ended up free writing into the AI saying, no, it's not this. It's actually more like this. And then kind of telling the story. And at the end, my command to the AI was the thing that I just wrote, put that into this treatment. In fact, it got so detailed that I told it, hey, the next version of the treatment, you don't need to hold to the 500 word limit. Show me what the whole thing would look like. And I was unsatisfied with that because when it spit it out, it started again putting in a ton of placeholder data. And I'm like, no, it's doing too much of the work. So I said, put it back to 500, but one thing I was really happy with is that once I had added enough context or flavor or nuance to get a section of it done, I would tell it, do not change Act 1. It's done. So any of the changes are after that. And so every time I'm iterating, it's almost like it's a personal assistant, and I'm just saying, I want the story to be this. And it's just formatting it for me in the way that I want. So I found it to be really helpful because it was accelerating stuff that I would have done anyway, but I didn't have to burn the mental energy or the time to make my vision a reality. And that's where I think as a step change, because I could lose focus, right? I could lose energy. If I have this great idea, but I know it's going to take me an hour and a half to kind of get it on paper, then I have to have distance from it, kind of sit back and look at it and go, well, is this really what I want? No, I need this, 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 and this. That's another hour and a half. Am I really going to kind of set that time aside? The answer up until now has been, yeah, probably not. But this allowed me to go, I can get more instant gratification and just kind of rough out what this might look like. So let's see it. Now, the thing I want to tell you, Tim, is that I did not allow it to write any actual text or dialogue. I put some dialogue into my prompts. I'm like, oh, and they would say this and they would reply with this and blah, blah. And so it included some of that dialogue. And then, when I did the longer treatment and asked it to just tell the whole story, it was kind of funny because it tried to tell the story in 7 acts. And I'm like, nope, 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 nope. We're going to do 3. I want you to conform to the 3-act structure as described by Sid Field. Let's keep this simple. It's not 7 acts. It's crazy town.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm just sort of like, that just feels like sometimes when AI feels like it is so silly is when it's like, you need a 7-act structure, which is traditional. Right. What are you talking about? All right, cool.
No,
all right, I'm sorry. Go on, please.
Dude, and that just highlights that it can make mistakes and you can't rely on it to do the work for you. And that wasn't the intent. The intent was to just take the idea and kind of shape it into something that I could review and go, is this a movie that people would want to see? And I found using the tool just to do that was super duper helpful because, the format of the kind of 500 word treatment, it starts with a log line, which is kind of the quick summation of the conflict. And that's the thing that's going to hook a studio exec, because that's actually how I arrived at that. I said, here, give me a 500 word treatment as if it were going to be pitched to a Hollywood studio exec. And that's when it put in some, I would call it sales language, where it's really trying to, sort of convince you to invest in the product. I started to strip some of that out later when I needed that room for more story. But initially I'm like, oh, this is good because I need to know if this is a story that people would want to see. So once I worked through this, probably 4 hours plus in, and I had replaced all of the placeholder nonsense with things that I cared about and understood the motivations of the characters and really felt like I had a story that was mine. The AI had helped me shape it into this format, but it was my story. I started to share it with some people and go, hey, is this a movie that you'd be interested in seeing? And the resounding answer was yes. I was very surprised. So I think this is something I could have done on my own, but it would have taken a lot more time. And I think the risk for me is that I would have just quit at some point because it was taking too much time and it was kind of a lark. But as a fun afternoon exercise, it worked out really well to the point where I'm now excited enough to do this for real because I feel like I have an idea worth exploring. So now it's about doing the beat by beat outline and whatnot. But yeah, so it was really cool. And look, I could sit here and talk about that for an hour. So I'm going to stop talking. If you want to ask any questions about that, but I could seriously just blab on this for a long time, especially around the how. The how is so compelling.
Well, I think, I've mentioned this before, and using this sort of like, artificial intelligence to do things is kind of, we're all sort of trying to navigate it. It seems like it's incredibly horrible for the environment, et cetera, artists who get their work ripped off, et cetera. So I'm always reminded in these conversations of that time that I saw that documentary, and I've mentioned it here, I believe twice, over the course of our entire podcast. David Bowie and I believe a friend of his had worked on a program, and this is back in the, 90s or early zeros, where David Bowie would just type in a bunch of headlines or sentences. All of those sentences would get chopped up into, the various types of words they were, and then would spit out suggestions, kind of almost like, if you Google a book title generator, something will just sort of kind of give you random book titles that you can use as inspiration. So a part of me was back then, I want to be very clear, David Bowie is upper echelon. And if you know me, you know this is a big statement. I think David Bowie is above Bono in my spiritual place. But it still feels a little bit like, oh, you mean that title that you came up with didn't come from your brain. It came from a generator. So I have a little bit of that in my own sort of bias towards AI. But it just feels like what you've done is just you're using it as a tool to sort of organize the thoughts. And the question I guess I would have is, did you feel that the AI was suggesting things too much that you had to cut out? In other words, was it bullying you into, by the way, what about this Confederate gold idea? You know what I
No.
mean?
Yeah, no, there
Okay.
was no bullying. Now, here's the risk. So you are correct about its environmental impact, and I'm not at all sitting here saying that it's worth that, right? But the toothpaste is out of the tube. At this point, it is a tool that can be used at work. They're actually encouraging us to use it because it provides a competitive advantage. And I'm looking at this going, I would never use AI, and I mean this, I would never use it for my own personal short fiction. Never, because I don't want it to write sentences for me. I can write better sentences than it can. But for something that was kind of a lark that I was thinking about trying to commodify, to me, that is kind of a work product. And I think the only way that I would use AI, like where I would sort of throw it off and no longer use it, is once I got to sort of an outline of a movie, right? So like, this is the movie you're going to write. Here's the treatment. And then I'm going to work with it to figure out what that outline is. What are the sequences and the scenes that need to be written? Thanks, AI, catch you on the flip, and I go write it. I think that's an ethical way to use it because this is work that you would have done anyway. Using note cards and other software tools. Like it's just another software tool at that point. Where it gets tricky is if you ask it to write things for you. And I have a friend who's doing this. So my friend, and I cleared this with him up front. I said, look, you're not trying to like sell this, are you? No, absolutely not. This is and so it's his own personal thing. It's a story idea he's had for a long time. And he is having the AI write it for him because he wants to experience the story, but he has no desire to publish it. It's really never going to see the light of day. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Knock yourself out. But for people who are trying to use it and pass off its output as their own creative work, that is a hard stop. That is not okay.
Yeah.
So
that's where the ick factor comes
absolutely. In. And it will never be okay because like you said, the AI is trained on other people's writing. And so it doesn't know what it's doing. It still doesn't know what it's doing. It's not a thinking thing. It's a friggin' Mad Lib generator. Okay. But it's just really good at generating awesome Mad Libs. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to use the tool because like I said, the toothpaste is out of the tube and I'm using it in a way that I consider to be ethical. But it's so easy for people to use it unethically. And that is a risk and it's out there. Yeah. So that's why I thought it was a pretty interesting discussion for us to have because I feel really strongly that it is accelerating some of the grunt work that I would have done anyway. It's just helping me get to that stage more quickly. And it's helping to keep my level of interest in the project high, which improves the likelihood that I'm actually going to complete the work. And I'm excited about that. It feels like having a personal assistant, and I think if you use it that way, that's okay. And here's why. So I have that same friend who's doing his story. He was saying, man, it would have been really cool if back in the day when we were doing our Star Trek role-playing stuff, if we could have finished this particular story. And so I'll rewind this for you. Back in the mid-90s, in the infancy of email, we were separated and long distance was a thing. So it was hard to get on a phone and talk because it was really expensive. So we said, hey, email's free. Why don't we do role playing by, basically by letter, and so we were writing each other emails and it was actually a larger group. It was like 3 or 4 people who were participating in the story. And so I have the transcripts of all these different emails and DM chats and whatnot from the late 90s into the early aughts of this story that we were pushing forward. But it's so many different fragments of the story that it would be really cumbersome for me to try to read through it, summarize what had happened, figure out where the gaps in the story are, and then how would we move forward from that? And it's not really something I'm interested in continuing. I don't do a lot of role playing anymore, but it was a cool story. And he thinks back on it really fondly as, oh man, that was a great story. So then I got the idea, well, shoot, I have a personal assistant now, and the personal assistant AI is really good at taking fragments and turning them into something that's more cohesive. But I don't like the way that it tries to fill in the gaps. So this is right on the heels of what I just told you, where I was working on this treatment and it started kind of filling in the gaps. And I had to go back and tell it, no, slap it on the wrist. No, no, no. So this time what I did was I created an AI project, which allowed me to upload all of these different source files from 25, almost 30 years ago. And I gave it a set of simple rules. I said, thou shalt not hallucinate. You will not make up new crap. You will only read the documents that I've provided. You will summarize the story and you will highlight the narrative gaps. Where is stuff missing? But you will not put anything in to replace the missing stuff. And it's like, sure, no problem. So I asked for the summary and out comes the summary, and damn, it was amazing. So I sent it to my buddy and I'm like, hey, this is the story that we were playing through. And he's like, that's awesome. And then there's another tool called Notebook LM, which is just a different AI tool, but it has a really unique feature where you can upload a PDF or other source files and it will turn it into an audio podcast overview. Yes, you heard that right. If you haven't tried this yet, do yourself a favor, because it will, in a podcast style, a kind of a two-person podcast format, it will talk about whatever you upload. And it was super, super awesome to take this thing that AI had summarized for me and, I identified like 7 different story gaps. And then I put it in and I listened to a 16-minute podcast about something that my friend and I had played almost 30 years ago. Technology, baby. I'm on board. It was so cool.
All right. So then what for the treatment that you have, how do you keep the fire going? What's the next step? And actually, this is just me asking because you get a treatment, you start shopping it around, but you need to have a script or at least some sort of proof of concept.
Yeah. I wouldn't show this to anyone for real until I had a script written. And so I think it makes sense to go ahead and work through the AI to continue to refine the character motivations, which I've been doing, without the AI with great success. Like I'm really thrilled about the twist. I'm really thrilled about some of the motivations of the characters and sort of why the antagonist does what she does. I think it's really cool. And so what I'm going to do is take everything that I have quote unquote decided and I'm going to put it into a new AI project. Just so that it kind of starts from a fresh, clean slate. I don't want it to remember, we'll put that in quotes, remember anything that was from a previous version that I had sort of nixed. So I'm just going to get a clean, kind of expression of this is the stuff that's true about the story. And then I'm going to ask it to break it down into an outline. And I'm going to tell it not to put anything in, that I didn't want. And so it's basically just going to show me gaps as what I think is going to happen. It's going to kind of slot all the things that it knows needs to happen. And it's going to show me where there's missing information. And that gives me the opportunity to go ahead and fill it in. And once I've got an outline that I think works, then I'm going to go ahead and write the script. And at that point, I'll completely divorce myself from the AI because I'll just get a copy of Final Draft and I'll start writing. And then I'm going to reach out to some of my human friends who are script writers and see if they'll read it and give me feedback and just, follow the normal process for there. But it just accelerates all that front work of let's get a good idea. Let's kind of stress test the different conflicts and resolutions that could play out. And just kind of churn through all of that more quickly, instead of it, requiring me to sort of ruminate and, draft and revise over weeks or months. I can do that over days and get to a story that I think works, that's compelling, and that I want to write. It's really cool.
So you're saying that with AI, you can take ideas that you have and sort of help to coagulate something into a format that's very easy to, to sort of like streamline. But it's definitely a slippery slope, and it is up to the author at some point to say, that's enough.
Yeah, I do. And I think where it makes the most sense for novel writing is something that I always struggled with. You write your drafts in one document and you continue to update that particular document. And you may have multiple versions of the document, but I remember you telling me that when you draft a novel, it's all one big sticky mess, right? It's just one file. And so I've got tons of files with different snippets and whatnot. And I always found that it was really hard for me to keep track of what was where, especially if I was just like, I ran into a problem where I would number the not the drafts, but like I would write on a particular day. And so if I wrote on Tuesday the 12th and the name of the file was Tuesday the 12th and the next was the 13th, the next was the 14th, it gives me no information about what's in there. And so I would have to open every single file and try to figure out what it was. And it just became this logistical headache for me. I was not very good at keeping all of the pieces organized. And I think this tool would help me get to organization more cleanly, because that project that I was just telling you about with the Star Trek story, which I don't intend to write any of that. I just wanted to kind of compile it and see it as a big thing and enjoy it again as what it was. Well, now I'm thinking, oh, well, shoot, if I have multiple files or even a particular file that's not well organized, even in the case that you talked about where it's just one file, if you've got a bunch of stuff in that file, you could upload it to an AI project and tell it how to organize it, and it will go through and parse the language and spit it out the way that you want it, like a personal assistant. So I think that is an ethical way to use the tool to help you organize your thought, not to replace your thought with its own, stolen thoughts from other people, but really to help you organize the work that you're doing and sequence things. I think it's really, really good at that, and I think that's a very ethical way to use it.